Okay, so this just became my favorite angle in WWE, my favorite storyline right now, and I think based on the crowd reaction we saw on Monday Night Raw, I think fans are really coming around to this entire thing. So what I'm talking about is going to be, of course, Chad Gable, Otis, Sami Zayn, Alpha Academy. This whole thing is starting to come together, and I'm really liking it. The reason why is because it's a bit of a slow burn. At first, when this was going on around WrestleMania between Sami, Gunther obviously as Intercontinental Champion, Chad Gable, it wasn't clicking all the way. And I don't know if it was so much a misfire by WWE or because they were laying the groundwork for what we were getting right now. So let me know what you guys think in the comments below. And if you enjoy videos like this, do me a favor and hit that subscribe button because we're trying to get to 5,000 subscribers here on the channel. But I'm thinking about how at WrestleMania in the lead up, it really felt like Chad Gable, and at that time he was a babyface, it was really clear that I felt like he should have won. He should have been the one to go up and face Gunther. He should have been the one to win the Intercontinental Championship because they had Sami win on Raw and then he went off to WrestleMania and dethroned Gunther. Gunther's now moving on doing other cool things. And then after that, I kind of felt like, well, what was the point of that? Remember when we had leading WrestleMania, we also had the training montage and Chad Gable was training Sami Zayn and that was kind of goofy. And then we got fast forward past WrestleMania. And they started to plant the seeds in the groundwork for Chad and Sami, and we've seen, the whole arc right now, and we're kind of in the middle of it, I feel, or at least in the first chapter of it, where Chad Gable is being really controlling over Alpha Academy, telling them what to do, not being impressed with them, shutting them down. And what's happening is the crowd is getting more and more behind Alpha Academy as a result. And they're getting more and more behind Otis specifically. And it's really telling based on Monday Night Raw that is what is happening right now. And it's a lot of fun. Sami Zayn, though, as Intercontinental Champion, I gotta be honest, I feel like Sami is perfect for this role, for the story they are telling. But I don't feel like Sami is the main focus here. I think that what they are going to end up doing is they're going to give us a really cool long-term story of Sami kind of disappearing at some point out of this and it becoming much more about Chad and Otis, Chad and Alpha Academy and the crumbling of it. Monday Night Raw really felt like it was going in this new direction with this storyline. And I wanted to cover this because I feel like it's fascinating and I think that there's also a lot of callbacks to the way WWE did the early Bloodline storyline when Sami was heavily involved in it. It was Jimmy and Jay and Sami, the relationship with Roman Reigns, all of that. I got a lot of nods to that story in this on Raw, especially because they are starting to plant those seeds and get you emotionally invested with the characters a lot more versus if this was just under Vince and Vince was running this Sami Alpha Academy storyline, that Chad Gable would have broken off with Alpha Academy right away in week 2. They would have fast-tracked this whole thing. They would have gotten to the match at Clash of the Castle, and that kind of would have been the end of it, and then we'd have no direction. WWE is doing something interesting here, and I think that it does play into a lot of what we saw with Bloodline, because in that story, Sami, in the earlier part, Sami Zayn was the one, and Jey Uso also, right, was very conflicted. Do I turn? Do I side with my brother or my friends? All of that stuff. And I think you're seeing that a little bit, but now with the twist of Alpha Academy, where Sami Zayn is still the good guy. Chad Gable is kind of filling that role, that Roman Reigns role. And I don't mean he's Roman, but I mean he's filling that leadership role in the storyline. And Otis and Maxine and Akira Tozawa are playing kind of Jimmy and Jay and Sami roles in this whole thing. So what I mean is you have Otis becoming that sympathetic character like Jay was, like Sami was, where especially with Jay in the Bloodline, you wanted Jay to turn on Roman. You wanted it to happen, and he didn't pull the trigger for a long time. You obviously wanted at some point, you wanted Sami to turn on Roman, and it wasn't happening. And all the conflict in their characters and emotions and all of that. And that's what got me way more invested with Bloodline, was the dynamics between them. And it's funny too, because Otis is not a character that talks on the mic. He doesn't get a lot of mic time at all. He doesn't cut promos. You might get him saying a few words and going, oh yeah, backstage, and that's about it. And so I feel like they are doing something really cool with this, because you have more of a silent character in Otis, where it's all like expressions and the emotions on his face and the crowd reacting to his body language and how he's reacting to Chad Gable and all this, and Sami Zayn being the one who's like, I gotta get you out of this. I gotta get you out of. And remember, that is very much like Kevin Owens and Sami Zayn in the Bloodline, or Sammy and Jay, where it was like, I need to get you out of the Bloodline. This is turning into Sammy being like, I need to take you out of Alpha Academy. You need to stop this. And even Sammy alluding to this on Raw, that like, he can relate. He knows what you're dealing with because he went through all of this with Bloodline. So I really like that WWE is doing these types of callbacks to the other storylines, making it a real universe. Because once again, if you went back and did this 3 years ago, 4 years ago, there would be probably no mention of Sammy with the Bloodline. It would just be like washed, like it didn't happen. We're in a new story that's singular, that doesn't relate. This is different in that they're getting you way more invested. Chad Gable, by the way, as a heel, is doing phenomenal work. We already know he's great in the ring, but he's taking it up a notch, and he's developing more of this bully character that he has over Alpha Academy. And we saw this play out even more on Raw, where you didn't have Chad in the ring. Sammy wants to go after Chad Gable. They have the rest of Alpha Academy come to the ring. Maxine reads this letter that was written by Chad and forces her to read it to Sami Zayn. So he's playing that cowardly heel, and he's deceiving everybody, and it's also putting down the rest of Alpha Academy all at the same time, and gets Sammy more frustrated, obviously. So the letter runs down Sami Zayn. He wants the Intercontinental Championship match against Sammy. He runs down Alpha Academy, and then we get the blindside attack of Chad Gable onto Sami Zayn while Alpha Academy watches and doesn't do anything. And this is where it all started to spark, and this is where it really felt like it was similar to the Bloodline storylines that we had seen in the past, where you had all the characters in the ring and they're feeling very conflicted. You had Chad just taking out Sami Zayn and barking orders. Then you had the rest of Alpha Academy starting to leave, and you did have Chad getting into the face of everyone in Alpha Academy. And then you had the first moment, and by the way, the crowd, it was constantly cheering for Otis. Even when Sammy was the one talking about how he's gonna go have the IC title match against Chad, they weren't chanting Sammy, they were chanting Otis, which is interesting. So then you're gonna end up having a moment where Tozawa pulls back Chad Gable, which creates a pop for the crowd, which is awesome. Pulling back because he's getting to the face of Otis too much. We fast forward a little bit, and then you end up with Sami Zayn accidentally, because of Chad Gable, accidentally pushing out Akira Tozawa and Maxine, who does a great job of actually selling a leg injury there after she falls off the apron. Otis is this whole time is dealing with, do I attack Chad Gable? So the crowd is just getting more and more hyped for this, wanting Otis to do it, wanting them so badly to turn their back, Alpha Academy to turn their back on Chad Gable, and so badly wanting Otis to be the catalyst of all of this, being the one to finally turn his back on Chad Gable. And I was watching this thinking, they're not going to do it. They're going to tease this thing so that they could play it out even longer, which is what happened. And I thought it was a really good move for this whole story that they had Otis not just turn his back on Chad and walk out of the ring sulking and all of that, because we've seen that. They made it a little bit different. So this time, because the other two got knocked out, Chad is pointing and saying, hey, Sammy did that. Sami Zayn, no. And then Otis makes the decision to slam Sami Zayn down to the mat, which, by the way, looked pretty nasty, like hit him hard with it. So Chad's happy, Otis is on his side, and the crowd just boos and knows that it's not the move to make. But it adds in a layer of intrigue, in my opinion, because this doesn't mean that Otis is like, oh, it was Sammy and then I'm just turning my back and I'm siding with him. No, it could add more layers to this, because it could end up meaning that Otis knows that Chad was the one instigating this, doing this, but felt some kind of loyalty, or hit Sammy just out of pure frustration that he's not ready to, turn his back fully on Chad because it's so conflicting, and the emotions and the history between those two. And so he takes out Sami Zayn in that moment, which, by the way, we could end up with a Sammy versus Otis match, and they could do that. Sammy being frustrated, Maybe Sami Zayn is gonna later, turn his back and say, you know what, I've been trying to help Alpha Academy. You keep taking me out because of this. Like, you're on your own. Maybe not, because Sammy's probably gonna be the savior in all of this to try and pull them out and away from Chad. By the way, to back up for a second, one thing that I did love was in that letter read that they did, they were calling back all of their prior gimmicks. Like, they brought back Akira Tozawa being a ninja. They brought back the fact that there was like Maxine is just like a Barbie doll kind of thing. They brought up that Otis won Money in the Bank and lost it. Remember that? That was all very silly. He's like, Vince had a hard on for Otis. He really liked him, and then got bored, I guess, and dropped the storyline. So I loved all of that part of this segment. And we finally know that we are going to get Chad Gable versus Sami Zayn for the Intercontinental Championship at Clash at the Castle. This is going to be very interesting on how they play this. We've already seen at King and Queen of the Ring that Otis having the conflict and all of that in the match, so they don't want to do that again. But now you've had Otis take out Sami. So it's going to be very interesting what direction they go with this. In my opinion, you guys let me know what you think of this whole segment and what they are doing with this in the storyline. But for me, at Clash of the Castle, I think that what you do is you put the title on Chad Gable. Sami doesn't need to have, in my opinion, a prolonged story with the IC title. He doesn't need to be Intercontinental Champion for 6 months, because I don't need everybody that holds a belt in WWE to have the belt for so long, like a year. Sami doesn't need it. Sami, I feel, does really good with a storyline. The IC title is kind of secondary. Like, I know it isn't for Chad, but it's not the main important part of all of this. So I don't need Sami long-term to have the IC title. I think it would do more if Chad walks out with the IC title because he maybe forces Otis to help him, or Akira Tozawa, or all of them, to take down Sami, to bully him, to whatever, but it results in Chad winning the IC title, thus having more of Chad Gable holding control over Alpha Academy. Like, okay, now he's the champion. Like, we really can't get out of this thing. You can get a rematch between Sami and Chad and do that again, and you could have that at Money in the Bank. You could blow it off in like a steel cage or something. You could do something, or just do a straight up ladder match since it's Money in the Bank weekend. But then you're gonna want to do the eventual turn, much like Bloodline. And this is why I think this is gonna be very exciting to see how it plays out and what WWE does from a story perspective. So what I want to see happen is Chad gets the IC title. Maybe they all end up taking out Sami Zayn one way or another, whether it's going to be in a rematch or it's just ending a Clash, but Sami disappearing for a little bit, because then you could set up finally a moment, and whether that's at Money in the Bank or, more likely to me, they will blow this off at SummerSlam, kind of a big crescendo for the story they're telling. And you have Chad Gable as IC champion, maybe going up against Otis finally at SummerSlam. And you can have the big blow off moment. You could have it at Money in the Bank where Otis finally turns on Chad Gable. But it's really fun and cool to see them do this on like Raw, because a lot of the Bloodline moments was a mixture of stuff happening on SmackDown and the PLEs. So they could do this big Otis moment, which is what the crowd is dying to see. And they got to be careful that they don't stretch it out too long, but they can do a really cool thing where Otis finally attacks Chad Gable, maybe because Chad finally does something dastardly as IC champion. Maybe he takes out Tozawa or Maxine. Something has to trigger Otis to push him over the edge. He's been smacked around, he's been bullied constantly, but that hasn't been enough to trigger him. So something is going to push Otis over the edge. And when that happens, you're going to get that moment of not only Otis getting in his face, but getting Otis taking out Chad Gable. Because when it was about to happen on Raw, you could feel the energy in the crowd that they wanted it, and you're teasing them a little bit longer. So let me know, when do you think that they should pull the trigger on Otis and Chad Gable? It's very funny too, because Otis has been a tag team guy for so long. And again, he doesn't go in depth on the mic. He's just a big guy and he's doing cool things, but he is over as a babyface with the crowd. And so is the rest of Alpha Academy. And it's going to be really interesting and really cool. If they play this right, they can build Otis into a really big babyface. And you could get Otis versus Chad Gable at SummerSlam, which is kind of crazy because you wouldn't think that that would be a big match people would want to see. But the way they've told the story, you're getting Otis to this point where he's going to be a big deal. And if they pull the trigger, you could have Otis as your Intercontinental Champion. But even if Otis can't even win a belt, because it's not really about the IC title for Otis. It might be for Sammy, it definitely is for Chad. Otis' story is about breaking away from Alpha Academy, specifically Chad Gable. Much like Jay, Jimmy, Sammy, all breaking away from Bloodline. It wasn't really about the belts. It was about that relationship. And so you could have an IC title match, but what fans really want to see is that moment where Chad gets taken out and Otis finally breaks free.